Once again, a very warm welcome to all of our attendees this morning. Just to start off, obviously, the tips to continually prevent COVID-19. We know that it's something that we really hate hearing, speaking to a lot of people out there, but it is affecting a lot of us. In fact, it's getting closer and closer to home, where a lot of people are starting to go for tests continually. A few friends going for 5, 6, 7 tests already because they've come into contact with so much COVID-19 positive cases throughout their businesses. Some in the plumbing industry as well. It's tough. You cannot work from home. Would love to be able to do plumbing over Skype, but that's just not a possibility. And so you are going into these places as essential services, and really you're doing a fantastic job in assisting companies keep clean water and getting the waste out. And yet we are also putting ourselves in very dangerous situations. So we really appreciate what you are doing. And we also appreciate that you are continually preventing COVID-19 in your own workplace. So just those tips again: to wash your hands regularly. Please use soap and water. Don't only rely on the alcohol-based hand sanitizer. You can use that if you do not have soap and water available. Do not touch your eyes, nose, and mouth with any unwashed hands. Avoid close contact with people who are sick. Cover your cough or sneeze with a flexed elbow or a tissue, and please remember to discard of that tissue in a bin where it can be taken to a waste, as well as clean and disinfect frequently touched objects such as hand tools, power tools, anything that you might be using and sharing throughout the day, including our vehicles. One of the things where you are walking constantly underneath your feet, you might be walking on surfaces all the time. We don't know where viruses and bacteria are growing while we are walking. We hop into our vehicles, we may put the heater on, and the heater circulates the air inside the vehicle. And so if our shoes are constantly dirty, this means our carpets inside of our vehicles are dirty. It could have viruses, bacteria, and all other types of fungus. And if this is circulating through our vehicles, either through the heater or the aircon, please remember this will then obviously move in and around the environment that you are driving in. So just keep in mind that we want to ensure not that we are aggro about what we are doing. We want to keep a positive viewpoint, but at the same time, please do your part to prevent COVID-19 in your workplace. Well, let's get started with our Toolbox talk this morning. As we mentioned throughout this month, we were going to be looking at training management within a company. Now, what is training management? What can you do about your training within your company? And how can IOPSA assist you? First off, we want to say a very big thank you to IOPSA, very big thank you to SIOSH for accrediting these with 1 CPD point. We have had a few questions on how you claim the CPD point. You can only claim a SIOSH CPD point if you are a member of SIOSH. It's exactly the same as your PRB CPD points. You can only claim it if you are actually registered with PRB. So that's how you go about doing that. PRB obviously has got a different method, but if you are a SIOSH member, you should know by now how to actually get that point. You log into your membership portal, and then you just go to the CPD points section and allocate it under FEM Toolbox Talks. So training management, what is training management? Well, first of all, the benefits of training, the value that you are going to get out of training and development. These all act like a domino effect. You see, leaders will feel competent and they can efficiently influence employees' performance. Now, I'm going to just say that again. Leaders feel competent. Any training management starts with management. You cannot train the lowest member of your staff and move up. You need to start at the top, working your way down. Now, this does not mean that we are giving management or upper management precedence, but you can only lead by example if you have been trained within that example. So you want to feel skilled, you want to feel that you can influence and that you are speaking from a place of authority to your employees. And this helps employees to feel that they can accept what your management is saying because they are backed by some sort of training. Now, employees will then obviously increase their performance, and a skilled and engaged employee will result in a higher job satisfaction. Employees feel better when they know what they are supposed to be doing. They will also provide commitment and thus obviously retention of your workforce. Now, the overall improvement and engagement benefits and overall profit of the organization. Now, if you don't believe us, this has been tried and tested if it is done in the correct manner. Now, if training management is structured correctly, if it's supported by management and it starts at the correct way, and it is not just effective, but consistent, then the outcome will be an organization's overall profit. Well, why is that? Is it doing training just for profit? No. The profit is a byproduct of the training program that you're going to put in. What we are actually targeting, our goal, is to have employees' satisfaction, to have employees be committed to the job, and have employees want to stay at their jobs. You see, a trained employee or an employee who's performing better, who is more skilled, is obviously going to increase the quality of workmanship. And the quality of workmanship radiates to your customers. Your customers then speak about the type of quality that they're receiving, and word of mouth is one of the best methods in order to get new business. So a byproduct of that is obviously more people want to use a quality service provider. Where does it start? Well, it starts with the law. It starts with management and what you need to do within the company. Now, according to the Occupational Health and Safety Act, there are two types of training and two areas of training that need to be considered. Now, this is mandatory, so please remember what we are discussing with you today. We do have some suggestions on CPD or continual professional development, but what we are going to discuss in this slide is a mandatory minimum requirement in terms of the OSH Act. So let's start with employees. On the top left-hand corner, employees must be trained in accordance with Section 8.2E of the Occupational Health and Safety Act. This states that an employer has the responsibility or duty to provide information, instruction, training. All right, so there we see straight from the start, you need to provide information, instruction, and training, as well as supervision. And this is where one of the appointments of managers come in, somebody who is called an 8.2E. Again, it's talking about a supervisor, a manager. You could use this manager to provide the training, but please remember, you cannot train someone if you do not know it yourself. And so we want our supervisors also to be trained. And this is the second part of what the law requires. If you take a look on the top right-hand side, when it comes to management, Section 8.2I of the same act, under duties of the employer, is to ensure that work is performed as well as plant and machinery is used under the general supervision of a person trained to understand the hazards associated with it and who have the authority to ensure that precautionary measures taken by the employer are implemented. Again, talking about a person in the supervisory or managerial position is trained, first of all, to understand the hazards associated with it. And then secondly, in order to have the authority to ensure precautionary measures are taken. So the risk assessment was really one of your basic training manuals that was used. A risk assessment was designed by a risk assessor or a risk assessment team. It was then shared with management. Management then put their own input into it, either changing the way it was designed in order to suit the employees or the work, always in accordance with what legislative requirements needed, and then in accordance with a hierarchy of control. Your hierarchy of control is what is the most effective way of eliminating or substituting or mitigating the risk to your employees. So those are the two areas where you must ensure training is done. But what are the two types of training that both of these areas require? Well, both areas require internal training as well as external training. Now, internal training are things like employee orientation. As soon as an employee starts with your company, they need to know what is their scope of authority. So what work must they perform? Who do they need to answer to? So who is their line supervisor, the immediate manager. Then you also discuss the occupational health and safety aspects. Who is the first aider, the firefighter? What is your evacuation drill or procedure? All of that is internal employee orientation. And this can take the form of inductions, whether internally or through a client when you get to site. Continual professional development for most plumbers. If you are registered with PRB, you need to get a certain amount of CPD points throughout the month or year, and you constantly look for areas where you can attain CPD points. But even health and safety communication, such as these toolbox talks in the morning, safety talks that are maybe held once a month, awareness programs that are brought about daily, weekly, monthly, 6 monthly, or annually, depending on how your training is structured, team building events, mentorships. All of this is necessary information regarding the authority that the employee has within the company. So if they need to do hot works, as we've seen through this month, if they are performing the work of using a grinder, well, first of all, we start by, does the employee know how to use that grinder? And because they're using that grinder, does the supervisor of that employee, as we see on the top right-hand side, know and understand the hazards associated with that scope of work? You see, then they will be able to see whether the employee is doing it in the correct manner and safe enough for themselves and those around them. This then leads to an overall employee or staff complement that is not just competent in what they are doing, but they are motivated to want to learn more. Because from a grinder, you now train hot works. Hot works, you now train firefighting. And all of this leads to a training management program within the company. Now, before we go into how you need to do your training management or what steps to follow to go about implementing a training management program, the last type of training that you need is external training. These are in terms of legal requirements for your specific scope of work that is being performed. As we mentioned earlier, if you are doing hot works, then you need to have a firefighter appointed in order to use the fire extinguishers or fire resources at your disposal. If you are more than 10 employees in a company, it is a legal requirement to have a first aider. But now, and this is just a side note on some of the questions I've received, do you need to have a first aider if you only have 5 employees on site? The answer is no and yes. Now, why do we say that? Well, in terms of the minimum requirements of the law, you do not need to have a first aider on site if you only have 5 employees. However, that is the minimum requirements. Should your client have issued you with a safety specification, that is their own way of implementing health and safety on site, and it is a requirement within their safety specification that you must have a first aider regardless of how many employees you have, but especially in terms of the law once you reach 10 people. So when you have 5, you have to have a trained first aider. Obviously, this needs to be discussed before the project. There is some sort of budget restrictions or requirements in terms of training up a first aider, time constraints, as well as ensuring that you get it done on time so that you get a certificate of competency when you arrive on site. What we are finding, though, is most plumbers go in, they do the quoting, they get the work, they get the PO number in order to perform the work, and then afterwards, the client says, by the way, please issue us with a safety file. On top of that, they send you a whole lot of documents that you must fill in. They'll give you a mandatory 37.2, pretty generic type of document, just to have an agreement between the two of you. Then they'll give you another document that says, this is what we require of you within your safety file. You hand in your safety file and they say it's not actually good enough. Did you read the specification we sent you? And now you're like, well, we didn't really have time for this. We said we needed to get the job done. You called us out and you said it's an emergency, which means an emergency trumps safety, because You need your toilets unblocked, you need your water done. So it's an emergency. How can we have a safety file within the next few hours? Please preempt that. We appreciate that it's not being done correctly. Your client didn't ask for it in time, but something that we must know, a health and safety file management system with risk assessments and a management program, a health and safety plan, all of these procedures, policies, and the methodologies of how we're going to do it safely is a requirement of the law for every company to implement, not only when a customer asks you for it. In other words, if a customer says you need a file, you should automatically know that you already have one in place. All you need to do is maybe tweak it to align with your customer's requirements. So it might be a very good suggestion that before you take on the project, ask them who the safety person is. If they have a consultant or an internal one, get those requirements from the start. This will alleviate a lot of pressure later on. You see, we've worked with a lot of clients that are actually happy to pay for additional health and safety. Now, you might say, well, that's never the case, but it is if it was brought up at the beginning of the project. So let us explain. Before we took on some of our projects, we requested the occupational health and safety specification. We read through it. It doesn't take very long. You can start understanding that there's minimum requirements of the law that they request, and then you can see whether they have additional requirements. Based on those additional requirements, we design a project plan. We then submit it with a new quotation or a bill of quantities, and we explain to the client that minimum requirements tells us as a company that we do not need this type of document, training, etc. But you are requiring it for your company. This means, and here's a quote, here's 3 different quotes that we have received in order to get this done. You can either choose another company, but you're going to go through the same headache, or you can have us do it. This is the additional cost. But we didn't overcharge the client. We're not trying to make money out of the client when it comes to health and safety. And this is where a lot of plumbers are going wrong. You see, they get a quote for a safety file. Let's say it's $3,000. Their quote that they send to their client is $6,000 because they're hoping to make $3,000 out of it. Then the client says no, and there's a fight. Sometimes you get it right and you get the extra money. But please remember, it is a legal requirement for you. So rather just get it in place in the start. If you have any questions, ask your client. And don't be afraid to ask because they're going to give it to you. Rather be prepared. Nobody wants a job that they are going to perform that they actually don't know what needs to be done. The worst is to fight with a client and burn bridges because of something as silly as a minimum requirement in terms of the law. So again, if you're performing scaffolding work, you need to be trained externally in terms of legislative requirements in order to build and erect that scaffold, to break it down, to move it. If you need to work at heights, you need to be qualified to work at heights on the 4 different areas of working at heights, whether it's a ladder, a scaffold, working on a roof, or even in a cherry picker, scissors lift, or any mobile elevated working platform. So these are your 4 areas within your training management within a company. So let's take a look at the 5 steps for you to go about ensuring that it can be done properly within your company. The first step is to conduct a training needs analysis. Now, what this is to look at the overall area of your company's expertise. You are working, let's say, for instance, within plumbing, electrical work, and solar installations. And by solar installations, I mean you're doing solar pumps and solar geysers and solar heaters, things like that. That's a specialized area for some. Some of you have been trained in master plumbing and perhaps don't need this type of solar training. I'm not too sure how it works within PRB and IOPSA to ensure that your continual professional development is up to date and new technology within plumbing is also trained. We also understand as health and safety professionals, you can have a health and safety diploma, but we still need to do CPD. We still need to update ourselves with what is current and latest technology. And so Once you've identified all the areas that training is required in terms of your own internal management of your company, so this could be trained plumbers, then you take a look at your trained electricians and your trained solar installation guys. Then take a look at all the work that you do, the scope of work. So installing geysers, installing hydroboils, excavations, working on ladders. Now, obviously, this is going to spiral out into other types of training. For instance, you're going to work at heights. Well, there's a working at heights need. But are you working at heights on a ladder, on a scaffold, on a roof, on a cherry picker? Because is there another type of training that you need included with that? Then take a look whether it's legal requirement or if you can do it internally. This is what a training needs analysis actually is. And an analysis is something that, for instance, if you went to a doctor and the doctor said, well, you've got a brain tumor, we need to actually operate on you and get this brain tumor out. We need to do an analysis or a biopsy in order to check whether we can actually take this out properly. And so they do that. They come back to you and they said, yes, we've reached a conclusion. We didn't see the need to do it 100%. We did it 95%, so we can get most of the tumor out. Well, you're not going to be very happy with that. You're going to want to know why the entire tumor wasn't removed. Why didn't they put in that extra effort to be 100% sure? Well, it's because it's your life at the end of the day, isn't it? You would be upset. In fact, you would probably sue the doctor or hospital that performed that analysis on you and only went to a 95% degree, because that means you have a 5% of the tumor still within you. A training needs analysis must be conducted in the same manner. Health and safety is the health and safety of people's lives. We need to do it to 100%. We don't want to stop at 40, stop at 60. We don't even want to stop at 99. We want to go until it is 100% accurate in accordance with what we are performing. Then step number 2, prioritize the training. First off, we want to know what is legally required in terms of legislation. Do we need a first aider? Do you have to have a forklift trainer? Are you working in excavations? Do you need to be trained in excavation? So what is all the legal requirements? That's the 2 parts of your training, external and internal. And then prioritize it in accordance with your scope of work. What works are you planning to do in the next few months to the year? Ensure that training is done as a priority. Then leave CPD not as a lost, but as an extra, because it is continual professional development that is something over and above legislative requirements and our own internal scope of work. Step number 3, source the correct service providers, materials, as well as venues. Now, this can be done in different ways. You can either have your internal or your external, and then look for different providers. And why not do that? Don't just settle on one that's a good friend, or perhaps word of mouth again. Get 2 to 3 quotes. Maybe sit down and ask them to come and see you, even digitally through Zoom, and find out what type of training they are providing. Are they qualified? Do they align with SAQA requirements or CETA requirements? Then get the correct materials, get the correct venue. Then set up a training calendar. Involve your team from management and staff. Find out who's going to be trained, when training needs to be done. And then the last step, stick to that schedule, because I can guarantee new work is going to come, emergencies are going to happen, and very quickly our whole training management system is going to fall behind. You need to stick to it, because if you don't stick to it, that resource that you've put into it, all that time and energy, is obviously going to be wasted. So here's a couple of suggestions. On the left-hand side of the screen, you can see SIOSH, the Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, does it free for all its corporate members. We design manuals, we design training manuals, we submit it to them, and they will issue a certificate for CPD points to us. So here's one on describe the functions of a workplace health and safety representative. This means that internally we can train our health and safety representatives. We've designed the manual, they have looked at it, and because they are a SAQA approved body, they are allowed to issue CPD points for this type of course. Now, yes, we don't train health and safety representatives in accordance with CETA, but every year we train CPD points for health and safety reps because they need to know and understand the continual improvement of being a health and safety rep. You can do the exact same thing internally, such as hand tools, housekeeping, emergency evacuation. Create your own certificates. This will help your employees to feel that they have achieved and attained some sort of CPD point within your own environment. Now, yes, you are allowed to hire a consultant to do this work for you. You're not being lazy in doing that. Some consultants already have all of these manuals and training. They can develop an internal training system for you. The key is to stick to the actual training. That is the most important thing. And so Ronnie Coleman said, hard work and training. There is no secret formula. In other words, you need to work hard. You need to train. Now, yes, he's talking about physical training, but this is exactly the same with our own internal health and safety training. So regardless of whether a company has an existing functioning training program, employee development won't ever be effective if the working environment doesn't accommodate continuous learning and encourage continuous learning. So please remember, whatever training or development you provide within your company, in terms of minimum requirements, scope of works, it needs to align with what your future workplace skills require, support your overall objective of the company, and then you need to deliver an innovative way that mirrors the transformation of where your business wants to go to. So to end off, if it is important to you, you will find a way. If it isn't, you will find an excuse. Training is vitally important for management and staff. Thank you very much to all of our attendees once again for taking the time out.